If we're talking about rare syndromes and disorders, we need to talk about one, Nance Horan syndrome. Its discovery and set of symptoms is unique, and genomics had a big part in finding out more about it. Let's start in 1974. Here we have Margaret B. Horan, Australian pediatrician. While working with patients, she began to notice a unique set of symptoms that appeared together, like cataracts, screw-like teeth, and intellectual disability. Surprisingly enough, she also noticed that these symptoms also appeared together more severely and more often in boys. In America, some very similar results were being found. Geneticist and internist Walter E. Nance saw his results and expanded them from children to also the families. Despite confidently linking symptoms of what would become Nance Horan syndrome, he knew that since it appeared in families, it had to be inherited through a gene somehow. Though it took a few years later to be developed, Nance likely used Sanger sequencing to locate or map this gene. Samples of DNA are treated with a primer that causes nucleotides or building blocks to elongate the sequence. This lengthening won't stop until an oxygen is tagged onto the end and labeled in 4 fluorescent colors. Finally, a jolt of electricity is delivered. The result is called an electropherogram, and thanks to the 4 different fluorescent tags used, we have a graph illustrated with different wavelengths. Each wavelength refers to a different building block, which all come together to create an entire sequence. The real magic began once you had 2 DNA sequences, one mutated and one not. To compare them, you had to align, annotate, and finally get to work. When looking at the sequence of a gene that can cause Nance Horan syndrome, let's think of the sequence in terms of blocks like before. If we lined up correctly, it's easy to see where a difference is. mRNA, which is read in frames of 3, tells us if this difference is functional. Each of these frames results in a working protein except for the one with the mutation, which tells production to stop. When protein production is prematurely stopped, symptoms appear and confirm the mutation's impact. And with knowledge of a sequence in higher incidence in males, scientists know to begin their search for the gene on the X chromosome. Once found, scientists can locate it in individuals to say who is affected and who is not. For the first time, Nance Horan can be diagnosed not by what it looks like, but by its genes, making it a genetic disorder. So, what is a genetic disorder? Genetic disorders are caused by genes located on chromosomes, of which we have 23 pairs. The 23rd pair determines sex, female XX, male XY. Nance Horan syndrome is caused by mutation on the gene NHS on the X chromosome. This means it's likely expressed in males, since males only have one X chromosome. This doesn't mean that it's all good in the female neighborhood, as mom can be a carrier, meaning that she has one gene that's mutated and one that's not. Normally, the non-mutated is dominant and protects her against the disorder, but this can't be said for the whole family, as dad is the only with unaffected X chromosomes, while mom can pass down affected or non-affected, leaving it up to chance to have a carrier daughter or affected son. According to the National Organization of Rare Disorders, Nance Horan syndrome is usually only fully expressed in males, though females who are carriers or heterozygotes show less severe symptoms of the disorder, and it shows congenially or at birth. Medical literature also shows that only about 50 families have records of the disorder. Sometimes genomicists use animals to demonstrate mutational effect. With Nance Horan, scientists know to look on the X chromosome for a gene similar to NHS. Mice have an area called XCAP. Scientists create a library containing all the sequences in this area, and one gene within it can have a random insertion. A technique called PCR makes copies of this mutation, and like humans with mutated NHS, these mice get cataracts. Much of what we know about Nance Horan syndrome today can be contributed to the joint efforts of Edward Nance and Margaret Horan, as well as genomic technology involved in Sanger sequencing and animal models. Cataracts, screw-like teeth, and intellectual disability, as well as X-linked inheritance and unequal symptom expression are characteristic of Nance Horan. There's much left to be discovered about Nance Horan syndrome, but the boom in support for genomics is bound to be a helpful player in uncovering all there is to know about this genetic disease.
Created using Powtoon.